have Lisa and Jim here.
Oh, they're Lisa was in Van Hulsteyn at one point.
And they love Peggy's hat, of course. Thank you everyone for being with us this evening. I'm so happy you've all joined us. More keep coming in, that's great. The structure of tonight's event will first be an introduction, a reading of Peggy van Hulsteyn's profile, then readings from her newest book, The Art of Murder, and lastly, some closing remarks about Peggy and her work from her husband, David van Hulsteyn. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to type in your concern in the chat box and I will assist you there. Mary Rogers says, Mary, Gay, and Don are here, Peggy and David's friends.
Hey.
Welcome, Mary and Don. The Art of Murder. Worlds collide in colorful northern New Mexico when two prominent Santa Feans, an outspoken, passionate environmentalist, and a glamorous gallery owner, internationally known and reviled, die under mysterious circumstances. A connection, perhaps, to an infamous physicist and an opportunistic New Mexico senator implicated in an international scheme? Author Peggy van Hulsteyn, a longtime Santa Fe resident, knows these worlds intimately. The Art of Murder is a smart, engaging, and entertaining novel for readers who love eccentric New Mexico and enjoy a good whodunit. Now enjoy learning more about Peggy van Hulsteyn and 6 readings from The Art of Murder, read by Susie Sonflieth, John Sherman, and Lynn Cline. Thank you. John, did you want to start with the profile?
Oh, yes. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Nevertheless, a profile of Peggy van Hulsteyn. Now that my speaking voice is impaired, what I have left is my writing voice, says author Peggy van Hulsteyn. She defines a writing voice as a distinctive way of writing that is your own, and uses as an example one of her favorite authors, P.G. Wodehouse, the clever wordsmith, who was the creator of Jeeves the Butler and Bertie Wooster, whom she calls the vacuous rich twit. And what a writing voice it is. Peggy is the author of 10 books, 4 of which have been written since she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 20 years ago. For years, she lectured on topics that were the subjects of her books. Her quick wit, superior writing skills, and prolific creation of works on a variety of topics remain clearly and cleverly intact. Peggy's latest creation is her first, but surely not her last, murder mystery, The Art of Murder, set mostly in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she and husband David have lived for 45 years. The storyteller, Michaela, or Mickey Moskowitz, a Santa Fe-born New York journalist, resembles Peggy, and her paramour, Berg, a physicist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, is not dissimilar to David, whose job at the lab brought them to the high mountain desert. Peggy joked about being told they were moving to SF near LA and pretended to be confused, thinking they were off to sunny California. An array of shady characters, not all of whom are alive by the end of the book, help form the plot. Mickey returns home for the funeral of her sister, who died in suspicious circumstances. She's joined by Berg and fiery district attorney Lupita, her closest friend, to help solve the growing number of crimes. While Mickey's career may resemble Peggy's work at Mademoiselle in New York, right out of Indiana University, with their first 2 years at the University of Missouri, with a degree in journalism, there are also stark contrasts to Mickey's life and Peggy's. Mickey suffered many boyfriends before Berg came into her life. Peggy and David have been married half a century. Mickey thinks cooking takes too much time away from work. Peggy loves to cook and is a huge fan of Julia Child. Many readers have told Peggy how hungry her new book makes them, with the tantalizing descriptions of delicious northern New Mexico cuisine. Here's a sampling that began with the contrast of Mickey's lack of skills in the kitchen with her half-sister Lupita's. Quote, before I could delight the crowd further with the promise of Twinkies for dessert, the cavalry, Santa Fe style, stepped in to save the day. Everyone knows that gringas can't cook, announced Lupita, making a dramatic entrance, marching into the kitchen while carrying a platter of her legendary stacked green enchiladas. Step aside and we'll show you how it's done. In a festive parade, the entire Gutierrez family ceremoniously strutted in, each carrying dishes that had delivered me from starvation in my childhood. I could smell the savory fragrance of green chili stew, carne adobada, chiles rellenos, pozole, calabacitas, sopapillas, and steaming handmade tortillas. I knew that the birthday boy, my aspiring chef, will love all of these Gutierrez family signature dishes, unquote. Peggy's accomplishments would, well, yes, they would, fill a book. Who knows? The 11th book might finally be her autobiography, which is sure to be packed with humor, insight, cats, yoga, recipes, and page after page of Peggy moments, all designed to inform and entertain. It's just what Peggy has been doing all her rich, eventful life. Her quote-unquote moments are those laugh out loud incidents and encounters that seemingly only Peggy has, such as the morning she was to give a talk on time management and skidded into the room just at the moment she was due to be introduced. Since her conversations have been as filled with humor as is her writing, those vivid storytelling talents made her description of her ironic challenge, fighting traffic and other delays to get to her lecture on time, caused us yet again to laugh. And there are certainly some very funny moments in her newest book, The Art of Murder. It was not a difficult book to write for this longtime Santa Fe resident who says, I don't have to make anything up, I just look out the window. If you know Santa Fe at all, you'll be aware of its reputation not only for centuries of history, architecture, culture, and tradition, but for its cast of quirky people who are drawn to this small mountain city. And whether they are friends or enemies of one another, they add to the atmosphere. Many of the persons in The Art of Murder, good or bad, alive or dead by the end of the book, are based on several real-life colorful inhabitants, including some of Peggy's friends and colleagues. But readers unaware of the sometimes fictional portrayals of actual Santa Feans or other northern New Mexicans will still enjoy the murder mystery, set in one of America's favorite places to visit. They'll also be taken to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the site of the Manhattan Project, and the development of the atomic bomb, and the mountains surrounding the city, as well as other locales in northern New Mexico. A whimsical, colorful map of this area of the state is found at the front of the book. The Art of Murder has just been released by Outskirts Press in cloth and paper editions. It's available on Amazon.com, any bookseller, or from www.peggyvanhulsteynauthor.com. She received the Southwest Writers Workshop Storyteller Award for Best Novel for this book while it was still a work in progress. The author, a fan of Nancy Drew since childhood, is in her element with The Art of Murder. Van Hulsteyns have long enjoyed living amid, being actively involved in the eccentricity of Santa Fe, its art and culture worlds, and studying its centuries of mysteries. Peggy has had a distinguished career in addition to her work in Santa Fe. In addition to serving as assistant travel editor at Mademoiselle, she's written articles for Cosmopolitan, Modern Bride, Country Living, and American Way magazines, newspaper pieces for the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Miami Herald, Kansas City Star, Chicago Tribune, San Francisco Examiner, and USA Today. She founded an award-winning advertising agency in Austin and served as director of publicity for American International Pictures in Atlanta. Her writings reflect her interests and her passions, often laced with the humor for which she is well known. David will be sharing more info on her other books later in this program. In her work in Santa Fe alone, after New York, Atlanta, and Austin, she worked and befriended many other talented residents, including photographers Laura Gilpin and David Donahoe, author Ann Hillerman, and Dick McCord, co-founder and editor of the Santa Fe Reporter. Both Dick and the paper are thinly disguised in her mystery. Many other writers and artists. Peggy sums up her love of writing, a profession she has honored for so many decades and with so many lectures, articles, and books. Quote, I like to think of writing as champagne bubbles, covering up doom and gloom, putting mirth back on earth.
Thank you so much, John. That was beautiful. And now we're going to hear 6 readings from The Art of Murder, starting with Susie Sonflieth. Thank you.
Why did Melissa have to die? I hate funerals. Although the first 3 letters of funerals spells fun, very few of them are. Most requiems are so wretched that I'm planning to be a no-show for my own memorial. So what was I doing at the Berardinelli Funeral Home on Louisa Street in Santa Fe, New Mexico? I came to bury my baby sister, Melissa, the only person I ever loved. I kept telling myself that any moment I would wake up and find that a brisk run down the arroyo off of Old Santa Fe Trail, followed by a couple of shots of espresso, would prove that this grotesque scene was only a nightmare, some macabre figment of my imagination. A blur of people, some I recognized, some strangers, streamed past the simple shroud-covered pine coffin which held my sister's body. Mel and I shared a sardonic sense of humor, and at one point I consoled myself thinking this was her idea of an ultimate sick joke. That shrouded body was somebody else, and Mel would pop up at any moment and yell, April Fool, gotcha this time. Get up, I silently cried out to the corpse. We are not amused. As a writer, I sometimes hate myself for writing rather than living the tragic and poetic scenes in my life. I have trouble being in the moment, and to compensate, I flip into reporter mode. Even now, I was observing this whole horror show from a distance, pretending it was happening to somebody else, a stranger's sister, not the little girl I taught how to tie her shoes and read her first book. I was in a tailspin, having just arrived last night on the red eye from New York City. Jewish Orthodox funerals are supposed to take place as quickly as possible, so I rushed back to my hometown of Santa Fe as soon as I got the devastating phone call from my adopted sister and Santa Fe District Attorney, Guadalupe Lupita Gutierrez. Mickey, mija, I'm so sorry. I'm calling with bad news. Lupita? My mind was already shut down by the profound sorrow in her voice. No, please, it's not Mel. Hours later, still enveloped in deep shock and heavy denial, I felt as if I were starring in a surrealistic movie. This could not really be happening, could it? People walking in slow motion appeared to be hugging me, uttering inane comments. Who were they? Should I know them? My body may have been in the room, but my mind was in a different zip code altogether. I heard myself mouthing words to Mel's kindergarten teacher and her Girl Scout troop leader. But that voice wasn't mine. It had to be coming from someone else. I could barely speak. I was senseless with grief, drowning in a vat of overwhelming sorrow.
Mickey meets with editor Brady, her old boss at the Maverick, and his St. Bernard, Brenda Starr. Kid, you need some Joe, Brady said, rolling up his rumpled, once white shirt and pouring a cup of muddy-looking coffee into a cracked blue mug. I must have been more exhausted than I realized, because I actually tasted this brew before I remembered that Brady made the worst coffee this side of the Mississippi. Before I could take another sip, a tiny fire spawned by his cigar ashes broke out in the wastebasket. Without missing one staccato beat of a sentence, my flappable editor poured his coffee onto the flames. What could I do but follow suit? Brenda Starr put her head onto my lap and drooled all over my new Adrienne Vittadini black dress. Oh, I had missed this place. Brady was not a touchy-feely guy. He scrunched up his face and it took a look of amused horror. He lit another inelegant cigar and quickly gave me an assignment. Mick, you need to keep busy. Take your notebook and sense of humor, head over to Letitia Rothschild's gallery on Paseo de Peralta, one for over-the-top openings. Classy, tasteful, eccentric, very vogue. Our readers eat this stuff up. I took a tiny fan out of my purse and blew his foul-smelling cigar smoke back into his face. Brady, have you gone corporate? Or is it the lack of oxygen at this altitude? You've always hated the phony baloney art openings. That's right, he said, smoothing the 2 or 3 remaining strands of hair on his otherwise bald head. That's why I gave you the assignment. In case you forgot, living in Gotham City, we're a town that eats, lives, and breathes art. Santa Fe is still the 3rd largest art market in the country. Yeah, I said, standing up to reveal my mighty 5-foot stature. And you're an uncompromising newspaper man. I didn't leave my job in New York to cover a bunch of shishi art openings. I came here to find out why Mel died. I know you're an investigative reporter. Hell, I raised you from a pup. I also know that your mind works best when you're working on 2 things at once. You're plugging away at your first story when your subconscious is percolating along on the second article. I looked at him incredulously and in spite of myself started laughing. That's right. How could I have forgotten the second law of the Brady School of Investigative Journalism? Beats me, he said, splashing club soda onto a blue bandana and dabbing in a huge ink spot on his shirt. The spot remained unfazed. You were my best pupil. Besides, he added while putting on a brown sports coat completely covered with dog hair, there isn't a better place in town to find out what's going on than at an art opening. But I'm talking about Mel's death. So am I, and so is everybody else. It's the perfect place to start asking questions. Remember my adage, Mickey, in Italy, all roads lead to Rome. In Santa Fe, all arroyos lead to art openings. It's gospel in this bird. Go up and smell the coffee, kid. With that, he poured me another cup of his foul-smelling Java and ordered both me and his dog to sit. I did.
Mickey and her boyfriend Berg discover their first clue as to how and why Melissa died. But it was Berg who shifted the moment. He opened his car door. Let's go. What? Where? Let's face what we need to face and walk out to Nunn's Corner, okay? Ready? Was I ready? For an instant, my mind went blank. Mickey, he said my name so gently. I jerked into action, nodding my head. Yes, ready. Berg was right. We needed to take action, and I needed to face the place where Mel took her last breath and her last view of this world. 5 minutes later, we reached the spot where the guardrail bounded the sharpest angle of Nuns Curve, the curve named for the nuns who died here when their cars swerved off the road on an icy night decades earlier. I'd dressed for the mountaintop party in the forest, so at least my boots were stoically prepared for this pilgrimage, even if the rest of me trembled like the aspens topping the ski valley. No obviously recent skid marks on the asphalt, meaning no one had slowed or jammed on their brakes during the past week, and impossible to tell when or how the numerous remaining marks had been made on such a steep corner. No tape, crime scene or otherwise, and just beyond the battered metal roadside guard, vegetation had been trampled flat. So much for ensuring crime scene integrity. Looks like they ran buffalo through here, I snapped, stuffing my fear and sorrow behind my trusty anger. I remembered from the accident report that Mel's bike had apparently hit the rail, tipping and sailing over with my sister still astride, about a dozen paces from the road. Berg helped me over the railing, and I took lead over the trampled ground. I saw some grease marks. At least I hope they were grease. They were black. There were broken tree limbs and a torn cholla, a native cactus known for its ability to dismember itself and jump onto passersby, but nothing else to see, at least at first. Berg carefully examined the perimeter of the scene. I did what he did, only on the other side. I spotted a rusty can of orange soda, a fast food bag, and other bits and pieces of civilization blown astray by the same type of breeze that now rustled treetops and made me feel my sister's spirit might be paying me a flyby visit. Santa Fe was already getting to me. I sighed, about to turn away, when a glint of sun off metal blinded me for an instant. Berg! He was by my side in a moment. I pointed to the spot more than 15 feet away from where we stood and almost hidden behind a tree. Berg used yet another hanky to retrieve the object. He held up the rough-edged piece of plastic and metal. The metal still had very large flecks of bright red paint, shiny red paint. What is it? I asked, staring at it. Berg stared at it too, frowning. I'm going to take a wild guess and say it's a side marker lamp from a very red vehicle, and it hasn't been exposed to the elements for long, so how could the investigators have missed it? My voice sounded very small. My guess, Berg said quietly, it flew off and landed in a weird spot. Just your amazing sixth sense spotted it. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Mel's death was hit and run, and her killer drove a red vehicle.
We get to meet artist Henry Swank and gallery owner Letitia Rothschild. A happy, smiling crowd gathered around him. The sudden appearance of the town mascot was a sign that the party was a genuine Santa Fe event. Swank, who according to his media coverage usually adored all this attention, seemed not the least bit interested in it this evening. Sure is good to see you folks, but I've got me some pressing business with Ms. Rothschild. Got to see her right away, don't you know? His eyes were glazed and he seemed extremely agitated. He was hopping from foot to foot, pulling on his left ear, and resembled a demented elf who'd just been kicked out of a homeless shelter. He pranced over to Letitia and said, Ms. Rothschild, I've got to talk to you right away. She was not amused. She looked about as happy to see Swank as she would a centipede squirming in her bottle of namesake wine. Her eyes shot laser beams and her red mouth pursed tightly. She put me in mind of an anorexic Queen Victoria. But Rothschild was astute enough to hide her murderous impulses, let her sense of public relations dictate. After all, the press, not to mention Santa Fe's creme de la creme, was watching, and Squank was their favorite puppy. Henry, darling, how delightful to see you. It wouldn't be a party without my favorite artist. Squank looked confused as if he were dealing with at least two faces of this eve. I've got to see you now, don't you know? I surreptitiously followed them on the pretext of finding the ladies' room. Good reporters are like spies in that they can make themselves invisible at a moment's notice. Rothschild was too busy doing her Cruella de Vil imitation to pay attention to me. You nincompoop. What do you mean by coming here now? Have you lost your mind? Get out. But Squank's stutter convinced me that his supposed benefactress terrified him. Just as things were heating up, Shackleton announced in his most formal, Jeeves-like tone, dinner is served. Berg, who had followed me and was ready to add some new recipes to his repertoire, grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the library, where supper was to be served. As we were looking for our place cards on the elegantly set dinner table, we were stopped by the sounds of a terrible ruckus. I looked around to see a cherubic man with the face of a Botticelli angel, sobbing like a 2-year-old whose favorite toy had just been smashed. It's not fair, he blubbered. She promised me a one-man show. Then this opportunistic asshole came along and she dumped me like a box of used kitty litter. His manic voice kept getting louder and louder. An attractive redhead sitting on the other side of Berg said, oh my God, who let in Jamie Inman, Santa Fe's infamous whiny wino? I thought he was blacklisted from all art openings. Lady better lock up her remaining bottles. Inman can drink anyone under the table, especially at openings where he's not the star, added another dinner guest. Shackleton signaled to his waiters to start serving dinner, hoping to reframe the situation. It was too late. Inman sobbed steadily while pouring his wine onto the tablecloth and threatening to fling whole bottles at the startled waiters. She's a bitch, Inman ranted. Most diners turned to watch his performance. A few ignored this apparently all too familiar scene and concentrated on the delicious victuals. She's ruined my career, Inman shrieked in a shrill and piercing voice.
Dr. Richard Wainwright holds press conference to announce his earth-shaking fusion energy results. I turned into the parking lot at Fuller Lodge a few minutes early for the Wainwright event. I sat on a bench in front of the historic building to absorb my surroundings and consider why I was here. Wainwright had scheduled a press conference in this very building to announce his breakthrough research in laser fusion. It was chutzpah with a capital C for his private research team to announce a major scientific breakthrough in a competitor's backyard. 3 nights ago, when I met Richard Wainwright at Letitia's party, was it only 3 nights ago? He'd struck me as a man who would think it great fun to thumb his nose at his former employer, Los Alamos National Laboratory. The man had an ego the size of Alaska and the money to back it up. Enjoying the Fuller Lodge setting while testing my recorder, I gazed at the houses on Bathtub Row, where Manhattan Project leaders lived in the 1940s, the only residence important enough to rate a bathtub. If these walls could speak, Button Nose, said Berg, hugging me from behind, what stories they could tell about Oppenheimer and Fermi and Beta and Robbie and Bohr. Unique and brilliant scientists all assembled to work here on one huge project. It's ludicrous and pathetic that Dickie Wainwright can claim that he is the heir to their throne. The hall, which looked like it could accommodate an audience of 100 or more, was rapidly filling up. I looked toward the back of the room where the scientific contingent was seated and noted the sartorial display. checks with plaids, too short pants that the kids call high waters, the requisite polyester on parade, and a gaggle of bad haircuts. Many of them look like they could pose for a Sears catalog. The representatives from the media and the Wainwright entourage, seated toward the front of the room, looked downright chic with their suits and dresses. But Wainwright, standing at Rendon's shoulder at the dais, stood out from the crowd. With his impeccable Armani suit and perfectly cut hair, he looked like the centerfold for Men's Vogue. As we waited for the festivities to begin, I asked Berg to describe the targets used for the inertial confinement fusion experiment that Wainwright is going to brag about. Be patient with me. Pretend you're describing them to a 10-year-old. It's elementary, my youngish Michaela. Merriman's been working for the past few years with folks from the Los Alamos supercomputer teams to come up with new target designs for the National Ignition Facility at Livermore. His newest one looks like a tiny metal cylinder, not much larger than a big grain of rice. But don't let the simple appearance fool you. It's extremely sophisticated and complex on the inside. It took 2 months to design and fabricate. I held up my palm and whispered, enough education for now. The press conference is about to commence.
Mickey learns that rock climbing can be fatal. I have been so fixated on emulating my girl hero that I must have blocked out everything else. Lupita was going to read me the riot act. Climbing is all about keeping your mind in the present moment. Very zen. The mantra for this slightly insane sport is focus, focus, focus. Getting distracted could get you killed. But something else was distracting me. Below me, yellow fragments of broken glass shimmered, and I thought maybe I was looking at pieces of black plastic or metal. There was no way I could physically reach that lower ledge now, but my mind connected the canvas case with the glassy rubble. I hadn't been merely distracted, I had been mesmerized. Suddenly, I was aware that I was freezing. Worse than that, I was shivering again and developing the death wobble in my legs. The symptoms of hypothermia flashed through my bewildered mind. I stared at the ledge I was on, like I was watching it in a movie. It was quickly filling up with an opaque layer of snow. Why hadn't I noticed that before? How did I get myself on a high-angle rock with fresh snow? Could this be real? It had to be the granddaddy of all nightmares, didn't it? Soon I'd wake up in our never-finished Canyon Road adobe with a cup of hot, steamy espresso in my hand. I tried to focus, get centered, assess the situation, and make it right. This getting things wrong and spacing out was so out of character for me. I was the poster child for planning ahead. Non-spontaneous, anal retentive was my middle name. But I had not been paying attention because I was so fixated on my fictional childhood detective role model. And now I was on a narrow ledge of a face with no rope and belayer. My hands felt frozen, my fingers numb. Could I have fallen into the same hypothermia trap that caught so many tourist hikers and climbers in New Mexico? I was having trouble holding on to the face. I was snowblind. I thought I glimpsed something or someone in the distance walking toward me. Was it another climber coming to my rescue or a snow mirage? It didn't matter. It was like Pascal's wager about whether God really exists. It's better to believe until proven wrong. If my so-called climber was merely an apparition, I would find out soon enough. I think I called out. At least I tried to yell, "Hello, help!" From out of nowhere, a figure appeared wearing a helmet and carrying what looked like a rock climber's rope. Oh, rescue was on the horizon. I was the endangered heroine of an Alfred Hitchcock movie with Cary Grant to the rescue. I smelled a strong and expensive scent, familiar, and yet something was off. Wham! My head seemed to crack open. Light exploded. I was falling, cold air rushing past, and the world went black.
They kept me mute for all that time. Susie, that was great. I sort of feel like I'm in that situation so often when I go skiing even. So yeah, I think a lot of us can associate with that. And I wanted to, before I get into the final bit of reading, extend my thanks to so many people. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Santa Fe Library for making this possible. And in particular, to Jessica Gulliford for hosting it, and she was invaluable. Maria Sanchez Tucker, who gave us the little thing to click on so that we could have the session. John Sherman did a marvelous job of just pulling this all together and paying a lot of attention to the details and details are everything. And Susie, I want to thank you and Lynn Cline so much for your reading, and Lynn for reading the names of the 6 scientists and pronouncing them correctly. For people who may or may not be present at this thing, I would like to thank Sarah Lovett, who was Peggy's writing coach and a mystery writer par excellence. And I'd also like to thank Laurie McDonald, who was our assistant all the way through, Peggy's assistant all the way through on this thing. And I don't know how many of you have seen the cover of the book, but Laurie was the one who designed it, and I just think it was marvelous. I want to thank Peggy for giving me an opportunity to thank Peggy. And I want to thank all of you who attended, family members, friends, and people who were just interested in the book. Thank you so much for being here. And now John did a very good job of reading without his glasses. I can't do the same. So, my closing remarks. Peggy van Hulsteyn had published 9 books prior to this Art of Murder. All of them were basically autobiographical. Her first 2, titled Mind Your Own Business, was published in 1982, followed not long thereafter by What Every Businesswoman Needs to Know to Get Ahead. These were based upon the experiences that John mentioned earlier when she was part owner of an advertising agency in Austin titled Hively, Van Hulsteyn, and Famat. They won so many awards. Her bed and breakfast books There are two of them, Birdwatcher's Guide to B&B and Sleeping with Literary Lions, were enterprising endeavors, as she wondered what to write about, based upon her love for traveling to sites of interest. And these included almost all of the 50 states as well as the Canadian provinces. One thing that a lot of people may not know about Peggy is that she grew up in a family that did not like cats. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And so when I first suggested getting a cat, she said, well, why would I want to do that? But the only thing that changed her opinion occurred when a family of mice, and she thinks I coaxed them in, invaded our house over on Arroyo Chamizo. So she wanted to get an exterminator, but I said, I think we want to get a cat. So reluctantly, the two of us went to the animal shelter and brought home a calico. And this elegant female feline, I keep on calling her female, which she was, but she's this elegant feline. Peggy named her Vanity, and Vanity eradicated the mouse problem within the first 2 hours. And Peggy became an allurophile. Now I use that word because I love it. Allurophile means cat lover, for those of you who care. Anyway, the result of this was 3 books, the first of which was Diary of a Santa Fe Cat, a humorous take on the life in Santa Fe as seen by Vanity. Second book, Vanity in Washington, which occurred when we were living in DC for a couple of years. And The Kitten Invasion, which took place when shortly after we adopted, well, can't say adopted so much as discovered 2 kittens deserted by the side of the road and brought them home the day after Christmas. And Peggy was really wondering how Vanity would accept this. In the year 2000, Peggy was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which I have to admit was a life-changing, depressing thing. But rather than moping about this life-changing experience, she chose to learn more about how to deal with it, and maybe in the process, be able to help others. So she decided to write about her experience. And she had several journal and newspaper articles. Among the journal articles was one titled, "And Parkinson's Makes 3." But the seminal tome that she produced, titled Yoga and Parkinson's Disease, I think was one of her crowning achievements. And it was a book that was endorsed by Senator Tom Udall on the back cover. And it was recommended by the Michael J. Fox Foundation as recommended reading. So here we are, 20 years after the diagnosis, and Peggy is still writing, but this time in a totally different venue. At the age of 72, she decided to try writing a mystery. As she put it, Agatha Christie has produced so many highly creative page turners. So I'd like to follow her example and try to create a mystery that will be fun and thrilling. The result has been the tome we're celebrating today. As she said, I enjoy the challenge of finding ways to combine sleuthing details involved in solving a mystery with a humorous flair that brings the characters to life. Peggy, who was named Peggy Elaine Gutman at birth in Connersville, Indiana, has been writing from the time she learned how to put letters on a piece of paper. At the age of 8, she wrote a play, which was produced or performed, I should say, by friends in front of an amused audience of parents in the metropolis of Odin, Michigan. After graduating from high school, Peggy entered the journalism school at the University of Missouri in Columbus, Missouri. And she shares with her heroine, Mickey Moskowitz, who also went to the same school. Peggy also received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Indiana University in English. And prior to writing her books, she had numerous articles produced, as John mentioned, among other places like the Washington Post, Cosmopolitan, Yoga Journal. She has worked in publicity director for movie company American International, was the lead copywriter at Tucker Wayne Advertising Agency in Atlanta, Georgia. And most important of all, was an owner of the advertising agency we've mentioned before, Peggy van Hulsteyn in Vermont. Reading has always been her go-to. This is where her creativity was born. Writers like Hemingway and Steinbeck and Austen honed her skills in creating living sentences. P.G. Woodhouse's tales, as John mentioned, of Bertie Wooster and his valet Jeeves, helped her create worlds of humorous fantasy. Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie's were her mystery icons. When it came down to who had the most intense effect on her passion, however, to create a mystery, we have to look no further than Carolyn Keene, and as most of you women know, creator of Nancy Drew Mysteries. This is another similarity she has with her heroine, Mickey. In addition to writing books and articles, Peggy had a gift for giving speeches. As an alumnus of Toastmasters, I always marveled at her ability to talk extemporaneously without an or Toastmasters hate that. Unfortunately, Parkinson's has stifled this talent, but there is a speech therapy program in Dallas that promises to offer some help along those lines, and we're going to be following up on that. In the meantime, she continues to make her words speak for themselves. We are all familiar with the terms, and John went into this, a speaker's voice that describes an orator's unique way of turning a phrase. For instance, we don't have only to think of Martin Luther King, unmistakable voice, John F. Kennedy, unmistakable, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, Peggy now has replaced her speaking voice with her writer's voice. I think we will all agree that her style is unique. She's one of a kind. And I want to thank you all again for all of this, for the opportunity for Peggy, and I wish she could have spoken for herself. Yeah, I'll let it go at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. That was a beautiful ode to your wife. And thank you, Susie, John, Lynn, for reading. You're wonderful readers and really brought the book to life. For those of you attending, if you haven't already checked it out already, visit Peggy van Hulsteyn's website. I put it in the chat box there. There's a link, peggyvanhulsteynauthor.com. You'll find all the links you need to purchase the book there. But better yet, David has offered that if you email Peggy and David directly at the email I posted in the chat box, you'll receive a discounted copy of Art of Murder, and it'll be sent to you directly from the author. We're getting lots of thank yous and terrific presentation in the chat box. Definitely visit Peggy's site to learn more. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the Friends of the Santa Fe Library for sponsoring this event. Be sure to check out Santa Fe Public Library's calendar for more events. And everyone stay safe, read books, read The Art of Murder, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we muted now?
No, we can hear you, David.
Thanks so much. That was beautiful.
It was wonderful. Thank you. A million times thank you, Peggy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.